There's a little-known part of Hollywood that most people are not aware of, known as the Audience Test Preview. The book, Audienceology, reveals this for the first time. Our podcast series, Don't Kill the Messenger, brings this book to life, taking a peek behind the curtain. And now, join author and entertainment research expert, Kevin Goetz.
Listeners, you're in for a treat today. One of the questions that I'm frequently asked is, what film have I tested more than any other film in the history of my career? And the answer is, without a doubt, the 1991 picture, The Marrying Man. I worked on that movie, I'm not kidding, 16 times. We conducted so many screenings that the producer said, "Kid, I'm going to make you an associate producer on this movie." Unfortunately, the DNA of that film had problems, we'll be kind. It was flawed. But it did, however, cement my bond with its producer, who is my guest today. I adore this man, David Permut. David, welcome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for introducing me with one of my pictures, which I considered a bomb. It's a great way to start an interview, Kevin. I'm leaving now, so nice to see you.
Okay, David, first of all, I want to tell our listeners that when I started producing, I'm going to be jumping a little bit here, you and Lauren Schuler Donner were the first two producers that I went to with some ideas I had, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. It all started with a very determined young guy in New York who moved to Los Angeles because your father was relocated right from New York. And very similar to my story, David, you began a business in your teen years. Mine was at 17, yours was at 15. We both started businesses. Tell me what it was.
Well, we have a lot in common, that's for sure. I actually owned the business because I was the publisher of Beverly Hills Map Company.
Beverly Hills Map Company.
Yes. Well, basically, I sold maps to the Stars homes on a corner in Holmby Hills. And I did very well because I was kind of an internal kid, actually. I lived and breathed movies and TV, and that was always
First
my
movie
dream.
that had an influence on you was?
Oh, there's so many. I can't even tell you.
You remember your first movie you saw?
I mean, one of them was West Side Story, which I remember seeing, so vividly, and that really impacted on me. But there's so Mad World. I mean, there's so many. I mean, like a floodgate of films coming back to me.
And what did they do for you as a youngster?
Well, not only film on screen, but also television. Obviously, I grew up with television as well. It took me out of my world and into other worlds. I visited all the other worlds of these stories and these shows. So
you were pretty introverted, but did you find some solace there? I mean, did you have a pretty happy childhood, or was it?
No, I come from a very loving family, fortunately. I'm very blessed that way. But I found my outlet through film and television at that time, and still do to this day. Storytelling and going to other places and looking through the keyhole at other worlds. It blew my mind. A lot of TV shows that I grew up with, et cetera, et cetera.
One of your great talents, among many, is your curiosity. My guest, Brian Grazer, is another really curious man who I so admire. And you have that sense of taking your curiosity and manifesting it into a project. I mean, that's so profound to me.
It's interesting they mentioned Brian, because Brian and I were partners prior to Ron Howard. We were two young guys. I think I was maybe 19 or 20. Brian was a few years older than me. And he had an apartment off of Olympic, and I had an apartment, and we were just getting going. And we called ourselves producers, although we produced nothing. And there was an article in the New York Times, actually, that caught Brian's attention, my attention ultimately, and we tried to put it together. And it was a story basically in a nutshell. There were two guys. They worked at night, and they were shining the hearse limousines at this morgue that they worked at, and they had phone service there naturally, and they decided to capitalize on that. And they started an outcall service, and they transported the girls in the hearse. So they had an outcall service that they ran at night because they worked the night shift cleaning the offices. Obviously, it got made. Brian and I, we were together at that time and had dreams and aspirations, both of us. But he wound up going to Paramount, I remember, and that's where he met Ron. And I wound up in a different pathway.
Let's go back to Star Maps. You get this idea to sell maps, which, by the way, you didn't invent that. It was from the
1930s.
30s, because I sent you a picture recently.
Yes,
right?
thank you for that picture. Yes.
But what did you do differently? Because you were very good at it.
Well, first of all, when I said I was a very internal kid, I think sitting on that corner changed my life substantially because, first of all, I'm interfacing with all kinds of people, tourists, and I'm also interfacing with Fred Astaire and Elvis Presley, who lived around the corner, and Katherine Hepburn, who came by in the 57 T-Bird. And they'd stop at the stop sign on Ladera and Sunset, the border, Beverly Hills and Holmbeals. How's business, kid? And
I mean, they encouraged you.
Well, Randolph Scott's wife gave me an umbrella. She thought I was getting too much sun. I had a director's chair, but the map was made by me. So I had a Xerox machine in my dad's offices, and so I published the map. Now, where I got the addresses, I knew somebody whose father was a very high-powered agent at a very well-known agency, and he helped me out with the addresses because I went to school with him. I was in 7th grade, and that's where I got the idea because we bought a movie map when we first came out here from New York, and I'm looking at the gates and the hedges of people's homes, and it was before TMZ, so it wasn't issues of invasion of privacy or anything.
I mean, Lucille Ball on Roxbury had no gate around her house.
No,
and I remember her saying in an interview that people would just knock on her door and her maid would answer and say, "I'm sorry, Miss Ball is not available." Or sometimes she'd answer it herself. Right?
Not only that, but she would come out and take pictures with people. And I knew Gary Morton, her husband, and she used to come by my corner. And no, it was
that was one of the most famous blocks, by the way, wasn't it?
Roxbury, Jack Benny, Peter Falk, Agnes Moorehead. Keep going. Jimmy Stewart, of course, across from
Ira Gershwin.
Very good, Kevin. Did you buy a map from me?
I might have.
It was accurate.
I might have. My friend just moved on to that block. It was Kirk Kerkorian's estate. He raised it.
I know what he did. I had to become a producer because I knew where everybody lived.
I think Ricky Schroeder's on that block.
Ricky Schroeder is on the corner, opposite cat, according to Lucille Ball's. And then, it's not far from there is Charo and her husband, Xavier Cugat. Cugat lived there because I got a flat tire in front of their home. I was a kid. I walked up and rang the bell one night, and she answered the door. And then Cugat was painting in the background, and she had a sheer robe because she was naked. He was painting a nude picture of Charo at the time that I got a flat tire, and they called the automobile club for me.
That's incredible. Didn't he have a rivalry with Desi Arnaz?
Yes, he did.
They had lived up in Chatsworth and also in Palm Springs.
You could have been partnered with me back then.
Well, you could have maybe been in my dance and acting school.
Well, I doubt that. But the one thing I'll address with the movie maps, it was negotiation. So the map started at $3. They would go to $2. They would go to $1. It was Tijuana and Beverly Hills. So, whatever the market would bear. So it gave me a sense of interfacing with people and also really got me out of my shell. And that's really what happened with
And you
maps.
made some bucks.
Every dollar went in my pocket. It was deposited in Beverly Hills Federal Savings. I had a pretty substantial bank account because I was very good with money.
Well, who else did you then partner with who was not so good with money but gave you your beginnings?
Well, that was the antithesis of being good with money because
you just walked right into that one, by the way.
I did. Money went through his hands like water.
Of course, we're talking about Bill Sargent.
Yes.
Wasn't he like P.T. Barnum?
P.T. Barnum, Mike Todd. What he was an element of the business that no longer exists. When you talk about showmanship, and you can talk about Jerry Weintraub and all that, but he really was with Colonel Parker when you really get down to it. But that was a different cut of cloth. And here's the thing.
How did you hook up with Bill, by the way?
Well, my dad came home one night. Now, you got to understand, I went to this private school in Beverly Hills. My dad comes home one night, and I guess I was around 16 or so because I was selling maps. He said, I met a guy tonight who's going to reunite the Beatles. I go,
He's
Dad,
going to what?
He's going to, that's what I said. He's going to what? He's going to reunite the Beatles. I said, Dad, give me a break. I mean, you meet a guy in a bar out here. We're in Hollywood. Reunite the Beatles. And then I turn on the TV that night, and there's a rumor that the Beatles are meeting in Hollywood. Holy shit. I got to meet this guy. Where is this guy? And my dad finds a business card that he had. He met this guy in a bar. And literally, I looked at it and said Beverly Hills. So I said, he's in Beverly Hills, so he must be legitimate, So I go to Little Santa Monica Boulevard. I go up to these offices, little rough around the edges, a little frayed carpet and a little musty. And I said, where's this guy? Is he here? Bill Sargent. I got the front desk. He says, oh, he's down the hall. I go down the hall, and he's not in an office. He's in a closet. And he's got a folding chair with one phone with no rotaries, and he looks like Burl Ives, that's kind of, and this is the guy who's going to get the Beatles. The guy's got no windows. There's a Xerox machine in there. So what happened was I went under his wing.
Wow.
And he tells me he did these shows. This is what he tells me. He did Hamlet with Richard Burton at the Lunfontaine Theater in New York, and he filmed it live, the first filmed live Broadway production. And he made millions because it was during the Burton-Taylor era in the 60s.
He really did?
He told me he did Harlow. There were 2 Harlows being done in Hollywood. Joe Levine, the great producer, was doing a major production of Harlow, and Bill Sargent was doing a quickie version on a video process called Electronovision, which he invented, starring Carol Lindley. And he came out off of Joe Levine's publicity campaign on Harlow.
He was legit.
And he beat him to the box office. Then he tells me he did the Tammy Show, Teenage Music International. Your listeners who haven't seen it, watch it. It's amazing. The Stones, Jan and Dean, James Brown, the Supremes, you name it.
A concert that he put together?
The first filmed rock show in the 60s.
Did he produce the rock show?
Yes.
Wow.
I didn't know he did any of this. So this guy in the closet looking like Burl Ives is telling me Hamlet, Harlow, the Tammy Show, the Stones, James Brown. I said, no way. This guy's full of shit. I don't believe it. How is this guy with no windows in a closet with one phone and a folding table? This guy's going to get the Beatles together, and he tells me he did all this. I go to the Beverly Hills Library. I look Horace William Sargent III from Cato, Oklahoma. Harlow, Hamlet, the Tammy Show. Holy shit, this is my ticket to Hollywood. Wow. I'm leaving the corner. I'm going to work for him. Anyway.
First thing you do is?
Sargent tried to put something together, which was a Lawrence and Lee play that I had told him about, that I read in school. And Lawrence and Lee, of course, wrote Inherit the Wind and Auntie Mame and prominent writers. So he acquired it for $1, and with one phone in the closet that he was in, I was his assistant, he bought the play. And then he booked the Coran Theater in San Francisco. Lloyd Bridges, Beau Bridges, Lee Grant, William Wyndham, Tom Bosley, and Ben Johnson, who just won an Oscar for The Last Picture Show. They were all going to star in the show, and he's going to do what he did with Hamlet, filmed a play with a live audience.
Which play was it?
It was called The Gang's All Here.
But it never happened,
did it? It was done
on
Broadway years prior to this.
Did it happen?
But he was going to redo it. No, because he didn't have the money, and he was scurrying around trying to get the money. And what happened was, I'm sorry I digress, but what happened was, I'm the assistant, and I'm there in the office, and the phone's ringing. It's one line, and Jack Gilardi's calling. He's like, God damn it, I've been trying to reach you for hours. He's like, God damn, these lines are lit up like Christmas trees. It's me and him in a card table in a closet. He didn't have the money. He's trying to put the money together. I'm living at home. I tell my dad, this is how it works in Hollywood. You got to put the project together and then get the money, Dad. That's how it works. He says, he's not paying you anything. You're making more money on the corner selling maps. I stayed with him until I went out to the Howard Weekly Apartments in the Valley when he didn't show up for the office in the closet one day. And I go out there while we're trying to put this project together. All these stars booked. And he ate at Chasen's one night with me, and he invited a whole cast, and they're all there. And we're in the A table, and Alfred Hitchcock's next to us, and this one I'm at Chasen's. And I realized Dave Chasen didn't charge him anything for dinner, because when he hits it rich, he pays him back 10 times what he owes him. So anyway.
He must have been the most charming man to hit Hollywood.
Seductive. And not only did he seduce me, he seduced the audiences to all the things that he did pull out of the hat.
Well, he did end up pulling off Give Him Hell, Harry.
Well, what happened is
right?
He disappeared. It's a long story. I'll give you the short story. He just disappeared, literally disappeared, and there went my opportunity until I'm an agent in Beverly Hills for a short while with an agency in Beverly Hills called the Moss Agency. And I wanted to represent writers because I realized writers were the key to the door. You needed material. If you had something everybody wanted, a great story. But here's the thing. They weren't a Writers Guild signatory, this little one-man operation with David Moss, and I'm 19 years old at this point. So I applied to the WGA because he said, you can do what you want, kid. I don't give a shit what you do. So I went to the WGA and became a signatory, and I'm like a junior agent. I don't even know what the hell I'm doing, but I did sign with the Writers Guild because I wanted to do that. He represented mostly actors, this agency. He wasn't a member of the Writers Guild. So I made the agency a signatory, and he said, do what you want. So I did. And one of the scripts I got was from this kid in Indiana. And I represented him, and I'm on the phone with him. I never met him, but he wrote a Spec Mary Tyler Moore script, and I sent it to Alan Burns, and I tried to get it going, and nothing. Anyway, he came back into my life years later when he was in front of the camera in one of my movies. His name was David Letterman.
Oh, my Lord.
So David was a fledgling writer when he was doing the weather in Indiana. In a radio station, he used to send me reel-to-reel tapes. So I was David Letterman's first agent. How's that?
We're on a little bit of a thing about comedians, let's also talk about Richard Pryor, who really launched your career in terms of making real money. What happened there?
Well, what paved the way for Pryor, getting back to Sargent, your question, Sargent was in my life during Give 'Em Hell, Harry, which was a film play we made in one night in Seattle.
Starring James Whitmore.
Starring James Whitmore in a one-man show, 6 video cameras. When I reunited with Sargent, shot in one night, one take. We got a call because nobody wanted to release it. Nobody would look at it. It looked like shit. It was taped to film.
Did you sell it directly?
We called the theaters and booked the theaters.
So you four-walled it.
So it's in theaters 3 weeks after we shot it. And they said they'll throw it up on a few screens. They liked the movie, the theater owners. But they said, we don't think it's going to do any business, but we'll put it in the theaters, see what happens. And then I got a call from the Academy, and they, congratulations, you've been nominated for an Oscar.
Unbelievable.
The actor was nominated. James Whitmore is brilliant. As bad as the quality of tape to film in 1976, James Whitmore is brilliant, morphing into Harry Truman.
You didn't do it for no reason. You did it because it was a really good show.
A great performance.
Yeah,
and you
great
captured
performance.
it with the spontaneity and immediacy of a live audience. So that film wound up costing about $50,000, including the party in Seattle. And we had 6 cameras. Steve Binder directed it. And punching cameras backstage like an old TV show. We had a movie in the can in one night. And then we converted it to film. And then 3 weeks later, it was in release. We wound up at the red carpet at the Oscars with James Whitmore. The picture does $11.5 million.
You have the distinction of taping the first live comedy concert with Richard Pryor.
That paved the way for Richard Pryor. That did $32.5 million. They said lightning struck once, it doesn't strike twice. With Give 'Em Hell, Harry, you got lucky. You know, we liked the film. Everybody said studios. They all passed. And we called Sumner Redstone, Salah Hosseini, Hank Plitt, all the theater owners who booked Give 'Em Hell, Harry. And 3 weeks after we shot Richard in Long Beach at the Long Beach Terrace Theater, it's in release.
Did you do the same thing with the multi-cameras?
Yeah, 6 cameras.
Steve Binder?
What? No, it wasn't Steve Binder. It was Jeff Margolis.
Not bad.
Pushing buttons backstage like a old TV show.
And what'd you all do? It was like a
well, as
revenue
Bill Sargent
share?
used to say, we're shitting in high cotton now. He was from Oklahoma, Cato, Oklahoma. So he was a fiery
But I'm saying no one got any money up front, including Pryor?
Pryor got $400,000.
Oh, he did?
Because he needed money. The only reason he did it is he needed money. He turned us down for quite a while after Give 'Em Hell, Harry. I tried to get Richard Pryor.
Did he make any more money on the $32 million?
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did.
And you made a ton of money, right?
Well, I did pretty well for
And Bill
starting my
finally
career.
got money.
I was like 22, and all of a sudden I'm president of a company and the Theater Television Corporation. We took over the entire 7th floor of 1888 Century Park East, and we were in business in a big way with Richard Pryor. Meanwhile, Ray Stark called me up, his office. I didn't know Ray Stark, and he called up and he said he'd like to see a print of the film. So I sent it to Mapleton Drive to his house, and the next day he called me and he said, kid, you should be at a studio. You're with a stark raving mad lunatic. The thing about Sargent, I wanted to say this. He was a promoter.
This guy, Bill, man, he was by the edge of his seat.
But he was a dreamer.
He was a dreamer.
He was a dreamer, and he was fearless. He knew he could sell tickets. I sell the sizzle, not the steak. That's what he used to say.
When we come back, we're going to talk about the vast ascent to being the most sought-out producer, certainly one of them. We'll be back in a moment.
Join me, Jacqueline Coley, on a brand new podcast, Seen on the Screen, presented by Make It Universal and Rotten Tomatoes. Meet the innovative people at NBC Universal as they share their journeys, inspirations, and the movies that shape them. Each episode is an intimate and fun conversation about the impact of film. Seen on the Screen is available now. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts.
We're back with the incomparable David Permut. David, why do you get embarrassed when I say nice things about you? They're all true, man.
You know why? This is why. I feel like I'm an outsider, not an insider in this business. I've always felt that way and still do. And I think I appreciate the accolades and all that. It's just weird for me because I'm living my dream, and it's like I'm ready for somebody to tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, the gig is up.
Speaking of living your dreams, you have a famous quote that you're known for, which is, die with your memories, not your dreams.
Yeah.
Well, that's a beautiful quote.
Well,
and you are absolutely the living example of that.
Yeah.
Why does that mean so much to you?
Because there's an executive who said to me, Jeff Sagansky, who I made Blind Date with years ago, which was Bruce Willis's first film, he said to me when I was talking effusively about a project, and he paused and he said, David, you have the exact same enthusiasm that you had when you came into my office and pitched me Blind Date. And I have the same passion and the same enthusiasm I did when I was making my own 8mm films when I was a kid, when I started in the business. I live it, sleep it, drink it.
Well, you and I know each other for almost 40 years, and I can tell you that Jeff is absolutely right. And I want to also, sorry to embarrass you, but give you another accolade, which is I believe you to be probably the best pitch man that I've ever heard. And I don't mean you've ever pitched me a project to produce or to finance, but you've pitched me stuff always by telling me, this is a movie we're going to be screening, this is a movie, and you got to hear it. And nobody does that like you. I'm sorry. And if I recall, and we go back nearly 40 years, there's a time when you, I believe, had at least one project set up at every single studio.
I've been in business with every studio, and still I'm in business with...
But at once, I mean, there was always some project that you had.
Yes, it's true. Yeah, well, I had a first look deal at United Artists. I had a second look deal with Jeff Katzenberg at Disney at the time. Bob Shea approached me about being president of New Line, and I'm not cut from that cloth, and I knew I wasn't. So I got into a negotiation, but I decided not to do that. And that was before DeLuca, and that was after Sarah Risher, that period of time. And we figured out another way to be in business, which we were. We made a first look deal, and the exception of the rule was he also gave me a stock position in the company.
What makes you, or what made you, I'm going to say makes because you're still that insatiable pitcher that can sell ice to an Eskimo.
You know what? Here's the bottom line. I'm not a great pitcher. I don't think I am. I think I know how to tell a good story. Yes, I'll take the compliment. I appreciate that. But here's the thing. If you don't believe in what you're selling, you're not going to sell it. You may sell it. You may get lucky because you maybe sell the sizzle, not the steak. But when you have the steak, when you have a great story and you can articulate that story, and that's what I'm
What do you think a pitch is?
Well, a pitch is an articulation, and I appreciate that. But it starts with what I'm selling. It starts with the story and the essence of the story. Because if that doesn't exist, I can't sell shit.
Okay, so let's unpack that for a second. For a lot of my listeners are up-and-coming filmmakers, and I'm curious for you to share with us what are the principal ingredients to sell something to someone. I think you've just given us one insight, which is if you are not passionate about it yourself, if you don't believe in it yourself, you're not going to sell it to anyone else.
Absolutely right. If I look back at my career, I think the movies that have really hit for me and resonated with audiences, they're all different genres, but what they have in common, and what you've recognized, obviously, in your world, the hook. How do you sell it? How do you make it distinctive from everything else? Provocative. Do something different. Don't cut the same cookie
But
every
let's
time.
take it back to Marrying Man. What's the hook in Marrying Man?
Well, here's the thing. I wouldn't qualify Marrying Man as one of the pictures. I'm talking about the successful picture I made. When I talk...
But, no, let's talk about Marrying Man, because Marrying Man, if I recall, you literally had gold handed to you on a plate in the form of Neil Simon, Doc Simon.
And believe me, being in business with Neil Simon, when he handed me the script over lunch the memorable day at La Scala restaurant in Beverly Hills, I remember I went back to the office and canceled my meetings and read the script immediately. He had produced all his movies, was Ray Stark, and he's offering me to produce his movie. So the story about Harry Carl, which inspired the story, Harry Carl was in the shoe business. He inherited from his father, a degenerate gambler, and he married Marie McDonald, the body, in Hollywood. He married her and divorced her and married her and divorced her, and Neil thought, what a great idea for a movie. So he took that and ran with it. Looking back on it, I was so enamored with being in business with Neil Simon, I realized in hindsight, and maybe I thought about it a little there, that by virtue of the premise of that, there was a repetitiveness to it. He married her, divorced her, and you run out of gas after a while in the third act.
It's a DNA problem.
Absolutely.
But 16 screenings tells you right there that you're trying to put lipstick on a pig.
I understand. And I was trying to take stock in your company, but they didn't offer me any stock. But in any...
Wasn't my company.
I know. I remember.
Let's move to some of the successes. Let's talk about Face Off.
Yeah.
How'd you get that done?
So that's sitting on a shelf at Warner Brothers with a producer named Joel Silver. And I happen to read this script and I go, holy shit, because here's what I was about to say about the hook. Dragnet, the shortest pitch in movie history. Dum, da-dum, dum. Dan Aykroyd and I went into Universal. That's how we sold it.
Dum, da, dum, dum. Wow. And they bought it off of that.
So
Who'd you say that to?
Hook, Frank Price, with Dan Aykroyd standing next to me. I tell you the story about Dragnet. I'm watching an old TV show, Jack Webb, black and white. I'm laughing. I always did as a kid growing up watching that show. And I'm watching an old rerun. And then 2 channels away is Dan Aykroyd on Saturday Night Live. The next day I'm on the phone faster than shit through a goose with Bernie Brillstein. And I say to him, I got an idea. He says, what is it? Dum, da, dum, dum. He says, Dragnet? Yeah. Let's do it. Let me call Dan. He called Dan, called me. Boom. We're in Frank Price's office. Dan and I go in there with Bernie. And the 3 of us are in there, and Frank goes, what do you got, boys? Because he didn't know what it was about. And we all said in unison, dum, da, dum, dum. So my dad calls me. When I told him I sold this project, he says, how do you sell something to somebody they already own? I don't know how that business works. My dad's in the real business. Anyway.
Your dad's in the real business.
In the real business. Yeah. He's in the real world business. Anyway, and a year later, we were in production with Tom Hanks and Dan Aykroyd. Became a big hit. So Hook, Blind Date. You know, Dale Launer was selling stereo when I first met him. He wrote Ruthless People, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, My Cousin Vinny. He was in a stereo store selling stereo when we first met. Blind Date, what a great idea. When he told me about Nina, who cuts hair in Beverly Hills, and his friend who went out on a blind date, and everything that could go wrong went wrong, it's Hangover in its day. It was one night on a date that goes apeshit. What a great concept. When I came across Face Off, holy shit, what a concept. 2 guys switching faces. Oh my God, 2 guys switching identities. It was sitting on a shelf at Warner's collecting dust with Joe Silver. I read it. I called him up. I said, can I get involved with this? Is there a way I can come in and offer something? Maybe I can help finance it. It's been sitting around for a while. Yeah, I'm getting this thing made. And they said, well, let us get back to you. And they got back, Mike Ward, Mike Clear, and they said, look, it comes back to us in reversion because there's an activity on it through the Writers Guild. But it's sitting on a shelf over there for a while. So I'm all over it like a pit bull in heat. So what happened is I wind up talking to the agents who represent the guys, and the timing was up in, I can't remember, 37 days. And I got a calendar in my office, like I'm in the prison. I'm crossing off the days. And at the end of it was a big deal. I wrote a check, never forget that check, because they knew how badly I wanted it. $100,000 for 90-day option.
Out of your own pocket?
Yeah.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Okay.
Come on.
Okay.
Putting your own money there.
Okay.
That's
a lot of movie maps. So here's what happened.
Even for someone who has now made lots of movies, but putting your own money in a project like that tells you the belief you have in it.
I thought it was a great concept, and other people finally did. But what happened was 90 days is coming up because I'm on the day 80 or whatever it was, and every studio passed. Nobody wants it. It's intentionally funny. 2 guys switching faces could be funny. I said, yeah, it's funny. If Gary Marshall's directing it, it's funny. Anyway, it was rejected everywhere. And finally, Paramount had rejected it originally. And then they turned around when I brought John Woo in. And John Woo had done all those great films, Hard Boiled, all the great films in Hong Kong. So he came in. And then what I didn't know when he wanted to do it, we made the deal with Sherry Lansing. Then what happened was Fox had first call on his services. So they pushed the button on Broken Arrow, and I lost my director. But fortunately, Paramount lived by the deal. But then Paramount said, we're going to co-finance it. We'll come up with 50% of the money. Find the other 50%.
And did you?
My former assistant became one of the acquisitions people at Disney.
So Disney came in for half of it?
Yes.
For the international?
Yes. And they regretted doing that because at the time, Paramount needed...
Paramount regretted doing that.
Well, I assume so. They got half of the revenue from a film.
Don't worry. They got more than their karma back on Titanic. Where,
very funny.
Right?
Yes.
For listeners who aren't aware, it was a 20th Century Fox. Titanic was going way over budget. They sold half of it to Paramount for, I want to say something, I don't know what the amount was, but it was way under what that was one of the highest grossing movies of all time. And Paramount did extremely well. So we're not crying for them.
We're not crying for them. And they did very well at Face Off, so much so that we're going to be making the sequel. The script is written. Adam Wingard's directing. And we're very excited about it. It's in the works now for next year.
Let me move to another success. And I have a little bit to do with this story. So I'm going to preface it with that. You went to school with Dino Martin. And Dino was one of the best buddies of Gregory Crosby. Gregory is a writer, and he had this incredible idea based on Desmond Doss, this pacifist Seventh-day Adventist, and he brought it to you. Now, I don't know if I made the introduction to Greg and you, but I might have. But the rest is history because you do what you do so well and brought it to Bill Mechanic, who had a way of financing movies as well. And so the two of you brought it to life. And I'm thrilled about that story. What's your perspective on it?
Well, how much time do you have? 17 years of my life on Hacksaw Ridge. And yes, you called me. I met Greg through a mutual friend while I was shooting a movie at Disney, and the stunt coordinator had mentioned Greg to me and this guy he had met who won the Congressional Medal of Honor without ever touching a gun in the bloodiest battle in Okinawa. I said, well, first of all, it's not a true story. I don't believe it. How can a guy not... You have to be trained in riflery to protect yourself and other men if you're on the front lines and, you know, if you're a medic. So, well, I quickly found out it was true. You did call me and you did talk to me about Greg Crosby, and thank God for Greg Crosby because he was the conduit to bringing me the project, and I was honored and privileged that he did. I approached Desmond Doss about acquiring the rights, and he had absolutely no interest.
But Gregory had built a trust with him.
Gregory built a trust with him. Keep in mind, prior to my existence, Daryl Zanuck, not Dick Zanuck, but Daryl Zanuck, the founder of Fox, and he wanted
I never knew this part.
Oh, no, there's a history. Desmond is a very humble, modest man. He felt uncomfortable with exploiting his story. Desmond Doss probably got tired of hearing from me wanting this movie for so long or wanting to tell his story. And he basically designated the church. So I'm no longer interfacing with CAA. I'm negotiating or
with the
interfacing with the Seventh-day Adventist with Bill Mechanic. Anyway, it's a long journey, which is a fascinating one. But ultimately, the fine citizens of Australia, had it not been for them, with our 40% rebate, being the only American, me, Bill, and Vince Vaughn and Andrew Garfield, total Aussie, below the line and above the line, that film may not have gotten made without the fine citizens of Australia and the tax break we got on it. The entire film was shot in Australia. So that's the key to the door, if you will. Walden had developed the script with us because we brought it to Walden with Bill. Anyway, we developed the script with Robert Schenken, and Andrew Knight came involved and did some rewriting.
When did Mel Gibson become involved?
We got good news from Walden. You have a green light. So how many times do you hear that in your career? Great. Two things. We'll co-finance the film. Not a problem. I'll find the other half. I knew I could. And what's the other thing? Well, they wanted to do it as a PG-13 movie. And that was their edict. That's what they do over there. They prefer to have films at that rating level with Phil Anschutz, who also owned Regal Cinema at the time. So I respected that. That changed over the course of development, I guess, their MO. And part of the thematic of it is the horrors of war. I mean, you want to be on the battlefield. So that wasn't going to work. So we got them their money back, and we put the picture together with all these people here who are in a lot of other businesses as well as Hollywood.
We're looking at the one sheet that just popped up on the screen behind David because we have rolling one sheets of David's movies.
You're unbelievable. You do everything.
And,
look at this. You got to see this studio. Anyway, we totally financed the film independently. We totally financed the P&A independently.
Just marvelous.
It was made by
Just
all of these executive producers, wonderfully contributing towards getting this movie made.
Wow. Just a great story.
Well, it's a great story for a lot of reasons. I think, Mel hadn't worked in Hollywood for some time as a filmmaker, and he was back in the director chair with us.
And boy, is he a major, major directorial talent.
Well, I'm so proud of the film, and that gets me back to really the importance of what we do.
And you got an Oscar nomination, did you not?
Well, actually, somebody said to me at the Oscars, I'll reveal this, but it's going to reveal a lot of things about me. I'm sitting there, I'm 6 rows from the stage, Mel's with us, and if you remember, Warren Beatty, I knew something was up because Warren was a little confused. I'm looking at him, and I knew immediately what happened.
I was in the room that night.
But I know what happened. You know what happened?
He went off stage,
No,
right?
he looked at that card, and he was surprised. Keep in mind, we won 2 Oscars at that point. We had 6 nominations. We won 2. So here's what happened. In my mind, because I wrote my Oscar speech when I was 13 years old, so I had it with me. I just filled in some blanks.
It was yellowed.
So it was yellowed. A little
tea-stained.
A little, yeah, you're right.
Edges,
exactly
burnt
right.
edges.
Pencil and crayon. It was with crayon. Anyway, so Warren Beatty's up there confused, and then he hands the card to Faye, and I knew immediately what happened. he was confused because nobody expected, and Mel said to me, look, I don't think Hacksaw is going to win Best Picture. You wanted to get me ready for that. And I said, yeah, I didn't think we were going to win Best Picture. I thought it was going to be maybe La La Land, like a lot of people did. But I knew what happened. He looked at the card, and obviously he saw Hacksaw Ridge on the card, which was a surprise to him, which is why he handed it to her. So I'm about to get up from my seat like this. I'm getting up from my seat. Anyway, for 2 seconds, I won the Oscar. Those 2 seconds in time, I heard Hacksaw Ridge being read in my mind. Obviously, I'm joking around with you, but
They read La La Land.
They said La La Land. So then somebody said to me after...
Which is also incorrect.
Right. So now we got the second film, which I now mentioned, not the second film, but the film that won was Moonlight. But for that 2 seconds, I thought, that's it. It's Hacksaw Ridge. Because he was so surprised. He looked surprised when he read that to me. I'm thinking he's surprised because it wasn't the front runner. It was Hacksaw Ridge.
I know.
In my mind, I won the Oscar. And anyway. And then somebody said to me cleverly at a party, they go, congratulations, David. You're the only producer who lost the Oscar twice in one night for Best Picture.
Another picture I want to talk about is Rustin, which I thought was just extraordinary. Coleman Domingo's performance is masterful. And I'd like to know, you worked on that with Barack and Michelle Obama.
I'll talk about the evolution of it from the beginning just till the last beat. And the key to the door was President and Michelle Obama. Without them, that film never would have gotten made. So here's what happened. I have to acknowledge two people I made a movie with, Dan Sladek and Chris Taff. And they're two young producers who came to me with a book called Prayers for Bobby. And Prayers for Bobby was about a teenage boy, very close-knit, loving family, who came out to his family, he's gay, and his mother tried to change his sexuality to the
Sigourney
church.
Weaver.
Sigourney Weaver. God bless Sigourney Weaver. Sigourney had never worked in television, in spite of her lineage and her family. Her
What
father.
a movie.
And Sigourney did a cable movie because I felt the rest of the country needed to see this movie. I didn't want to make it as an independent movie and preaching to the choir. I need to let people know, and kids and parents, and it was seen by many people. It was a cable movie on Lifetime. Sigourney starred in Prayers for Bobby based on the landmark book that Chris Taft and Dan Sladek brought to me, and we produced it together and wound up with multiple Emmy nominations and Golden Globe for Sigourney and all kinds of other accolades and awards. I was in the jury at Shanghai, and this young man comes up to me, and I'm about to go on stage to present one of the awards as one of the jury members of the festival a few years ago. And he wanted to thank me, and I thought he was going to talk about Face Off or Hacksaw Ridge or something. And he said he wanted to thank me for Prayers for Bobby. And I asked him in Mandarin, because I don't speak Mandarin, through an interpreter, asked him how he saw the film. And he had a black marketed copy because it's outlawed in China. So that movie meant a lot to me. And one of the things I must say is that I revere Harry Warner because Jack Warner was a shit. He only cared about selling popcorn. I actually met him, which is crazy. I'm old enough to know that I met him as a kid. Jack Warner, nobody really liked Jack Warner, but everybody loved Harry, his older brother. Harry felt that the power of what we do should serve three purposes, and he referred to the 3 E's: educate, enlighten, and entertain. And that truly is the power of the business because, look, I'm closer to the end than the beginning. So if I can make films that speak to that, that's really, to me, the goal we all have. I mean, it's great to make films that sell popcorn, no doubt, and I always want to hit. But Rustin speaks to that as much as Prayers to Bobby, as much as some of the other films that I'm involved in. But Rustin started with Dan and Chris giving me this book, which I read, a landmark book, acquired the rights, and, the uphill battle of selling it. So that took many years.
And how did Barack and Michelle get involved?
Right before they announced starting the company, I heard a rumor they were starting the company. And I was able to reach out.
Higher Ground?
Yes, Higher Ground. It wasn't announced yet. It was prior to the announcement. And I found a pathway forward through the lawyer who represented them. And that's the key to the door that made that picture happen. Now, I executive produced it. Bruce Cohen is a great producer. He line produced it. I executive produced it with President and Michelle Obama. And it's a film I'm enormously proud of. I acquired the rights from Walter Nagel, who was partnered with Rustin for many, many years in this state, and went to New York to meet him.
So you got the rights for it. So
that's where it started. Bruce did a wonderful job in the packaging of it. I executive produced it with the president and Michelle Obama.
So really, it was about using their political capital to push a very important topic forward.
Well, he was a forgotten hero in history. I think films that educate, enlighten, and entertain and serve that purpose, I think that's how you would define what their tastes are in documentaries, which they've done, and films they've done.
As we wind down the interview, I want to ask you about your, I guess, moving into your third act. And you mentioned it to me. Different projects have different meaning for you. And you realize, I suppose, time is a different currency, and you want to spend that time on things that mean something to you. Is that a fair statement?
I want to die on a movie set. You know, the thing about it is where I'm at now, and we're talking about the past, and you can learn a lot by the past, obviously, and you don't ignore any of it, and you have good memories, obviously, and some bad memories. You learn what to do and what not to do. You live and learn. But looking in the front view rather than the rear view mirror, what I'm most proud of now and what I'm passionate about, I made movies with a lot of people established in the business, incredible people from Neil Simon to Robert Schenken, Pulitzer Prize winning writers, Mel Gibson, all the great bold-faced names I've worked with. But for me, the real challenge and why I go to Toronto and when I never miss Sundance and I see 5 movies every day for 10 days. I just got back from TIFF. I saw 44 movies. It never fails that I discover the gold nugget. The gold nugget is the next generation of filmmakers, whether that's Sean Baker, when I first met him. I go back with all these great filmmakers today, and I could go through a whole laundry list with you of those filmmakers. But on the horizon, not in the past, James Sweeney just locked a picture that I produced that I'm in love with. So I'm not very objective.
What's the name of it?
It's called Twinless. And James was this kid from Alaska who went to Chapman and made his first film, micro budget, called Straight Up, which everybody should see. Straight Up, according to Owen Gleiberman, he said, James is a cross between Wes Anderson and Woody Allen. And the film was called Straight Up. And I fell in love with it. And I had dinner with James. I had nothing to do with it. It was made for a nickel. It was made for 150, 200 grand, whatever he made it for. It looked great, and the performances were great. Randall Park was in it. Anyway, I had dinner with him. And I said, listen, the first time we met, I said, listen, I'm making your next film. There's only one producer in Hollywood. His name's David Permut. What are we doing together? And he took an envelope out. And he said, I'm working on this script called Twinless. Twinless? What's that about? He said, it's about 2 guys who meet in a twin bereavement group. I said, what, a twin bereavement group? What the hell's that? I never knew a twin bereavement group existed. He said, they're around the country, an organization. I said, that sounds very original. I said, do me a favor, order dessert. I'm going home and read it tonight. And I did. And the next day, we were in business. And we developed Twinless. It stars James Sweeney, actor, director, writer. I've done 40-some-odd movies, never worked with an actor, director, writer on the same picture. We shot in Portland, Seattle. We wrapped the picture. Dylan O'Brien plays twins. So he plays Rocky, who's gay, Roman, who's straight, and that's all I'm going to say about the movie.
Wow.
I sent it to one critic, and he's sworn to secrecy. I can't say his name, and he can't say my name. He called me up, and you know what he said to me? He said, David, for once in your life, I've known you for 40 years, you didn't oversell. And then he said, congratulations, you discovered the next Hal Ashby.
Well, it's so funny you said that. There is a quote that you were attributed to have said that, do you want to work with Steven Spielberg? And you said, sure, but I'd rather discover the new Steven Spielberg.
Exactly right.
Wow.
And I think some of the people, even Dale Launer, he was selling stereo when I first met him. There are bartenders who's written scripts for me and movies that got made and successfully. To me, that's my greatest pride, is to discover. That's what our goal is, whether it's a writer, director, actor, producer, production designer. I mean, to me, discovery is what it's about. That's what really gets me excited.
Any other projects, David?
I have a project called Being Human, which is based on the true story of Judy Heumann, who was the center of President Michelle Obama's wonderful documentary called Crib Camp, and it's based on her best-selling book, and Sean Hayter adapted it. And when you come to a street corner and there's accessibility for a wheelchair, that never existed before 1980. And it's a story about Judy Heumann, the activist in a wheelchair herself, who fought in 1980 to have the government push a $2.3 billion infrastructure bill through, with a sit-in in San Francisco, the epicenter of this event. For over 30 days, they brought the government to their knees with a leader like Judy Heumann. And Sean adapted it brilliantly into a script, and we shoot it this year for Apple.
From your major commercial movies, let's not forget Farce of the Penguins, to what you're doing today is such an evolution of the man that's here today.
You know what, Kevin? If you remember when Howard Stern flew in as Fart Man to the MTV Awards, the producer on Fart Man, Jonathan Lawton, wrote the script. He wrote Pretty Woman, and then he wrote Fart Man. And it was going to be Howard's first movie, so we designed the outfit that he flew in farting with fire spewing out of his ass, coming down from the ceiling at Poly Pavilion.
I remember that.
So you go from Fart Man to Hacksaw Ridge. So somebody asked me, and the Farce of the Penguins with Bob Saget, you know, a stock footage clusterfuck. It was stock footage of penguins replicating the March of the Penguins called The Farce of the Penguins with an all-star comedy cast. It was my idea, and Bob and I did it together. And so when somebody asks me, what's your taste like? I guess I got to say from Fart Man to Hacksaw Ridge to Face Off to some of the films I'm doing now, Sigourney Weaver. You know, the thing about it is eclectic. I guess eclectic would be the right word to describe my taste.
Indeed. David Permut, I love you, man.
I love you too. And we have a similar love. We both love what we do, and it shows because you can tell when somebody's genuine and they have a passion. Passion's an overused word, but you have it, and I have it.
I want to go out with, for all of you listening, die with your memories, not your dreams. Again, thank you so much. To our listeners, I hope you enjoyed our interview today. I encourage you to check out David's many, many movies and television shows. For more filmmaking and audience testing stories, I invite you to check out my book, Audienceology, at Amazon or through my website at kevingetz360.com. And you can also follow me on my social media. Next time on Don't Kill the Messenger, I welcome director, writer, and producer Chris Landon. Until then, I'm Kevin Goetz, and to you, our listeners, I appreciate you being part of the movie-making process. Your opinions matter.